In the ash-choked passes of European wastelands, the Inferallti Hussars assembled beneath banners of red and black. Their commander stood tall upon a snarling iron mount of wheels and engines, raising a crackling energy lance that ignited the poisonous particles in the air. It was a signal for his host, and all around him, ranks of armored riders checked their ornate plate and flexed their massive servo wings upon their backs. This was the day of blood, a day of glory, and each Hussar here knew this. When all were ready, the thunder of revving engines rolled away like distant artillery as they headed out to meet the twisted horse of the Sen Confederacy. These purity-driven madmen would not threaten their lands, nor while any engine could still roar. "For the eternal host!" The war cry rang out, and with wings unfurling in shrieking harmonics, the Imperial Hussars stormed forward into war. Welcome everybody to the video. I have been completely enveloped in fleshing out and exploring the old 100 of the Unification War. These mortal men and women who have not only earned their place in the history of this era, but ended up being held in such high regard by the Emperor of Mankind that they were forever chiseled into the history of mankind. Even a lot of these factions would end up joining the Galactic Crusade, continuing their badassery amongst the stars. But completely upfront, most of these factions have nothing more than a line or two of official lore, and as such this really should be regarded as speculation and celebration of what these men and women could be. However, I love this setting so much, so I can promise you that I will do my very best to weave in the logic of the universe as well as what is known about the Age of Strife. Come along and let me know what you think about the Inferallti Hussars. The Inferallti Hussars are techno-barbarians from the fractured riverine strongholds and rat-blasted plains of Central Europa. Having been united through a series of tribal conquests, they were now seen riding the wastes, raiding and fighting in an ever-increasing amount of mutants and abominations that were fleeing the genetic purchase in the ethnocracy. By placing war camps on and nearby fortified ruins of the Dark Age of technology, mostly along the banks of dried-up rivers, they effectively used these dry riverbeds as routes for traversing large stretches of territories, using all manner of motorized vehicles, which became one of their trademarks. The increasing hordes of mutants and abominations that were fleeing these genetic purges, using ferocious shock assaults, hitting hard and getting out of danger as fast as possible, choosing to wound the enemy over and over again rather than dedicate themselves to a battlefield. When a battle was won or fought for another day, they would flee back to hidden war camps, where a refitting of their engine steeds and telling of their acquired glories was reveled in. This way of life bred a fierce warrior culture in a land that was made up of dry, windswept expanses and cracked earth, spotted with mutant overgrown ruins and glowing zones of radiation, where tribal war camps were the only thing to be found amid the desolation. Life in such a place was harsh and inwardly honor-bound, but raids for resources and duels for settling disputes were commonplace. Long-term survival was due to the maintenance of ancient wheeled engines that was essential for warfare and travel, and those who possessed such a vehicle developed almost a personalized bond with this engine steed. These steeds have very little in the regard of a set form, as they were often fitted and refitted multiple times during their existence. However, what made them so special was their namesake, the engine. This is a treasure from the Dark Age of technology, an engine with an incredible energy efficiency, meaning that with proper maintenance these would keep running for vast amounts of time. But with the limited knowledge of the age, these engines could only be repaired, not built from new, meaning that each true death and destruction of such a machine was a deeply felt loss by its rider. But don't get me wrong here, these highly mobile war machines made the Inferallti Hussars into a truly feared faction in the wastes. A warrior of this people upon their induction would be given an ornate chestplate, either from heavy-duty carapace or even salvaged power armor. This was bathed in all manner of chemicals that would then color it crimson and black, marking the young man or woman out as a true warrior. As time would go on and glories were gained from battle, more and more pieces of armor would be earned, and warriors would be seen in head to toe of heavy armor with hide-crested helms, sweeping pauldrons, riding an engine steed into battle. This was something right out of a legend in the wastes. The most distinct piece of armor that these mortals would use was, while not very practical, meant for intimidation and as a fear factor. Upon their backs of either their armor or their engines, they would weld massive articulated mechanical wings made out of light metals, often taken from downed skybirds or servo motors from wrecks. When riding at high speeds, these wings would unfurl and due to the high velocity emit a piercing, almost scream-like sound that could be heard from very far away. This created a weapon of terror, as a charge would become a wall of engine, thunder and screams, especially when you consider their favorite piece of weaponry, the impact kopie. This is a weapon that is coupled together from very light scavenged parts of the remnants of the Dark Age of technology, alongside with a specialized scavenged power field. The impact kopie served as a very effective one-used energized lance where the power field was built into its very light structure that, upon impact, would trigger. This created a weapon basically akin to a thunder hammer from modern 40k, meaning that a land strike would hit with such a force that it could break apart structures or even armored targets. Such Inferallti Hussars who were preparing for a final charge where they were prepared to die, they would be seen even hooking these lances up directly into the energy output of their engines, creating some truly devastating charges which I can only imagine would be equally devastating results, both for the enemy and for the wielder. When having spent their lance, they would draw curved blades and use pistols of any type that they could get their hands on, often developing personal fighting styles for ground combat. While augmentation of warriors is very popular within the wasteland, these guys have a kind of a different opinion, as most augmentations are reserved for veterans and leaders, mostly through rituals using cybernetics. This means that this basically comes from all of the clashes that they've been having with mutants, where they have come to see this as the other, and therefore they pride an unaltered form greatly, meaning they would shun such thing as gene augmentation and that sort of thing, but could accept a cybernetics. Therefore they would rely more on martial skill, superior armor and their discipline. They would clash repeatedly with the Zen Confederation in bloody border skirmishes, often afterwards taking the chance to raid these lands whenever they would rout their enemy. Whenever such a raid had proven rich and bountiful, each war camp would set aside a tithe of their plunder to be brought along for a yearly pilgrimage to the mountain of the Terraward clan. While they considered these isolationist techno-barbarians to lack martial honor and even common decency, they recognized them as one of the few sources of high-end components for repairing their engine steeds, meaning that they would be allies of necessity, an agreement which the Terraward clan would use unscrupulously, but that is for another video. The Inferallti organized themselves into mobile units referred to as companions. These formations would usually consist of 100 to 400 riders, serving as shock troops, and in larger battlefield scenarios they would gather into something called hosts. This would create forces that just by its mere passing would make the earth rumble. Supporting this were levies of foot warriors and foot soldiers and artillery crews that would bolster them doing sieges against static defenses, meaning that after the Hussars had cleared the battlefield, these troopers would be giving the Romans space to conduct a slow and grounding siege, something which the Hussars found very little interest in. The hierarchy would blend merit and proven valor into a sort of warrior aristocrat caste, where deeds were scribed upon banners, armors, and even the very engine steeds themselves, serving as a proof of the legend of any given rider. Determining who would lead companions would often be quite difficult, but was most often determined essentially by bragging contests and duels. At the apex of this culture is the Grand Wing. This position is chosen and acclaimed by a council of companion captains, and this is the leader given supreme command of a host. Beneath the Grand Wing would serve the bannerlords and veteran wing captains, lesser leaders of smaller groupings, all following the wishes of the Grand Wing. Commanding these forces would mean that you would be a person with a proven record as a warrior, a proven record of personal honor, courage, and a tactical mastery of how to utilize the charge, as this is no place for a commander relying on theoretical or military history. Encountering this force would be like stepping in from one world to another for another wastelander. For being accepted into this territory would mean that when you see these guys, they're absolutely brutal and rough around the edges, but this culture of honor means that this is a rare pocket of discipline and relative safety, as for an Imperial Hussar there's much more bragging right in killing mutants rather than poor rat-infested wastelanders. The ragged ash waster watched from the ruins of an ancient building, gazing down on the landscape below her that was covered in a greenish fog. A loud engine roar made her flinch as she flattened herself on her stomach. The column that she was overseeing advanced through the toxic haze. Unlike the slavering packs of ragtag mutant bandits that ruled most of this wasteland, these warriors rode in an ordered line. Their armor gleamed with ritual care, wings catching the silky light like living flames. Engines growled in unison rather than a chaotic roar, and when they accelerated what the fog allowed, their wings would carve notes of what to her ears almost sounded like singing. She could not help but think to herself there were others who fought like beasts for scraps, but these Hussars carried themselves with purpose and pride, maintaining their machines as much as themselves. She thought that in a world reduced to brutality, they still embodied something greater, a living echo of martial glory. The Inferallti Hussars emphasized mobility and shock assault over heavy grinding warfare, favoring light to medium armored elements that supported their thunderous charges across open rat plains. This, however, does not mean that they are a one-note army. Used mainly for guarding their war camps, they possessed very powerful but very limited heavy armor, which would only be brought along to the field of battle when truly titanic conflicts had to be fought. These super heavy vehicles were named stepworms and were heavily armored mobile gun platforms that possessed firepower to blast through entire fortresses. Often fitted with cartridges of missile batteries for softening up an enemy before the charge, or fitted with rare high-yield cannons for punching through hard targets. The legendary Grand Wing Vorian Krell used one of these stepworms as a mobile base, as he had fitted the super heavy crawler into a crawling war camp from which his companions deployed from. For medium engagement against an enemy that had docked in expecting a charge, they would deploy the Crimson Landbreakers, a medium armored assault vehicle that were made to ram position with an armored breach point and two large las batteries on its top, raining death. All manner of primitive cannons and siege batteries was also used when grinding down fortresses or other static points, but these are too varied and quite often depends on whatever the footmen were able to scavenge. Their legendary Grand Wing Vorian Krell was a massive battle-scarred leader clad in masterwork crimson power armor with enormous plasmid ventral metal wings. A peerless lancer and duelist, he would be seen bearing a relic energy lance said to have slain a Pharaoh dragon in Germany. Charismatic and visionary, he united scattered bands through strength and wisdom, and was the one who had the honor of being the only Inferallti Hussar to duel the Emperor. The Inferallti first encountered the Emperor's forces during the Unification Wars, as the brass and gold armies would advance into Europa. From Vorian Krell's point of view, this was simply another terrible warlord that tried to subjugate his lands, and the fact that the Thunder Warriors were all murderous killing machines probably didn't help that impression very much. A grand charge of Hussars met Thunder Warriors in the Red Plains, wings shrieking and lances blazing. The battle was so fierce and were such grandeur and casualties on both sides that the Emperor decided to intervene personally. His overwhelming presence halted the slaughter, and Vorian Krell would stand before Big E unbroken and absolutely covered in gore from Thunder Warriors. Impressed by their discipline, honor, and effectiveness as a shock cavalry amidst this barbarism, the Emperor offered them a place in a greater destiny, the reunification of humanity, and an end to endless wasteland warfare. Krell recognized the dream of the Emperor and saw that his wish to restore purpose and glory was pure. However, Grand Wing Vorian Krell would never accept a leader who he might be better than, and he would challenge the master of mankind by drawing his power sable. The details of the duel are not known, but I believe that the Emperor earnestly decided to duel this magnificent leader without the usage of any psycho shenanigans, as he both saw the need for the Hussars, but also recognized what they represented: honor, purpose, and brutality. The final fate is not known, but within the halls of the Imperial Palace there is a grand statue that is named the final charge of the Inferallti Hussars. These men and women will forever be counted amongst the old 100. Thank you so much for watching the video, and let me know what you think, as I'm especially interested in your opinion about this video, as this is basically 99% my own take. So anyways, I'll see you later and see you in the next video. Bye bye!